Warning, may contain profanity, hate speech, santorum, killer robots, or peanuts. I am Woodstock.
I wanted to specifically talk to you for a few reasons. I don't know that many people on the West Coast, and you happen to just move to Seattle. In fact, we were talking before, you're just you said a half mile from where the Chaz zone is?
Yeah, we're half a mile or a mile from Cap Hill, which is where Chaz was.
And you walked through it when you were looking for your apartment?
Yeah.
So was it as crazy as the news made it out to be?
No, but I should also point out I wasn't there during any active marches or any police crackdowns. This was just walking through a neighborhood, and right next to the park in Capitol Hill, there were a bunch of people set up with booths like you might expect at a art fair. And they had turned that block of the street into a giant mural they had painted on the asphalt. And I'm trying to remember exactly what they had painted, but I think it was just Black Lives Matter.
Okay. Yeah, there was I think it was on 6th Street in Austin. They had a big old art installation for BLM as well. But the thing I definitely wanted to pick your brain about, and I kind of mentioned this ahead of time, is you're a computer programmer, right? What do you do for work?
I'm a software engineer and architect.
And architect? Mm-hmm. Oh, software architect.
Yes, software architect.
You build houses too?
Nope.
Okay, software architect. I wanted to educate myself a little bit more, but also kind of expose all my listeners to the basics of coding, because I think it's undeniable that that's just the way humanity's going. We are more and more being forced into an interface with technology, whether we like it or not. We can choose to go live off in the wilderness, but if you're going to be part of society, you're going to have, at some point, you're going to have to be touching technology. You're going to get completely left behind. So as a father who is concerned about all of the kind of scary stuff that's coming out about, screen time, and we've all heard of The Social Dilemma. You watch that?
I have not, no.
It's good. It's really good at showing the potential dangers to kids of social media. So the kind of narrative they have is there's this young girl that she's addicted to her phone. They take it away from her at dinner time, and she goes and breaks open this lockbox just to get her phone. Like, she's crazy addicted. And then it talks about how they collect our data. It's that we all knew they were, but I guess we didn't know the extent of it, and how the algorithm in and of itself, its job is to, get you to stay on the screen as long as possible. And so they acted as if that wasn't obvious. I guess people just didn't know the extent of it. So I wanted to, get a basic understanding of coding, what that actually means, and then kind of go through the progression of how we got to where we are today with the crazy technologies that we have. And I want to jump into that and pick your brain. But, how'd you get into coding?
Well, I tried a little bit of it out before I really went to school. So for reference, I was homeschooled until I started college. But I had tried a bit out of it using my father's coding textbooks, hadn't gotten very far. And I finally took the Intro to Programming class at Dixie State College in St. George, Utah. And that's where I really did get started, was in college.
Okay. What drew you to it?
So first of all, I simply love technology. I love computers. My computer taught me to read. The first word I could spell was load. It was the command you had to type into a Commodore 64 computer to get your games or programs to load. And my brothers and sisters were tired of typing it in for me, so they made me learn it.
How old were you then?
I'm not sure exactly, but I'm guessing I was around 3.
So 3 years old, you were trying to learn video games to play them?
Yeah, there was a game called Talking Teacher, and it would allow me to play these little educational games, and I loved it. And nobody else wanted to play the old Commodore, so I got to play them about as much as I wanted.
That's awesome. And then from Dixie, you graduated from Dixie and just went straight into the market from there?
Yeah. From there, I went to a local company in St. George I don't know how much detail you want to know about what I worked on, but they made quality assurance software for big restaurants and hotel chains. So, for instance, they worked with Marriott International, making the audit application that Marriott Corporate goes through every location and franchise and checks off, yes, the floors are clean. Yes, the curtains are dark enough. Yes, the beds are new enough. That kind of stuff.
Okay. So go through the basic of coding. How do you get into it? How does a program actually work when we're getting on the computer? Because it's just electricity going back and forth. How the hell does that actually make pictures on the screen?
Okay, so if you want to know how to do it, I would not worry about the electricity part.
Okay.
Because I think understanding that is necessary to make you a great computer programmer. Knowing at least a little bit about every level, but it's not necessarily necessary to make you a good programmer. You get what I mean?
I don't know.
You've done woodworking, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably know quite a bit about how something like a circular saw works.
Yeah.
But you could be a perfectly good carpenter and know nothing about how the internals of that works, right?
Okay. Yeah. So don't focus on the hardware, more of the software, which is the algorithms.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you need to understand the limits of the hardware. For instance, you need to know how big the blade is that you can put on that circle saw. You need to know how big an integer can be in computer programming. Other than that, knowing how the fundamental systems work doesn't help you learn programming. So don't try to focus on it from the bottom up, because the bottom up is incredibly complicated to the point where I don't know everything down there, and I never will. I'm not going to learn it all.
So the learning curve is just too huge. Just don't waste your time with it. Just start with the platform that you're given.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So day one of programming, you should open up an interpreter and try to code.
I don't know what that means.
Okay. So an interpreter is something that's meant to take code written by a programmer and then execute it. And I can define these terms, but really a program is just a set of instructions. Like imagine you are in a room talking with someone who is absolutely and completely literal. They will do nothing but exactly what you tell them to do. And you have to write a set of instructions to complete a task. And if any of those instructions are misspelt, or you forgot a period, or the steps are in the wrong order, that person will say, nope, can't do it. And you'll have to start over. That's programming.
So it's a set of very complex instructions that I'm assuming start growing on each other, because what are the different interpreters? Are there different types of interpreters, or is it all?
So I think what you're getting at is programming languages.
Okay.
So there's the most popular language in the world probably right now is JavaScript. JavaScript runs in your browser. So when you visit a website and that website does anything, it's probably written in JavaScript. Like 99.99%, that's JavaScript. Every browser in the world runs it. Every website in the world uses it. That is one language. Then the language that's my personal favorite is called Ruby. It's declining in popularity, but it's still a solid language that I really enjoy. A big one for large corporations, especially Silicon Valley corporations, is Java. And by the way,
which is different than JavaScript?
Yes, Java and JavaScript have basically no relation to one another. It's a very unfortunate name.
Huh. Which came first?
I believe Java did.
Well, screw you, JavaScript.
The designer of JavaScript made a lot of poor choices, in my opinion.
But it's the most popular one?
Yeah.
Why?
It won the browser wars.
So it's like porn shows DVDs, and that's why we all use those instead of, what is it, Laserdisc, whatever it was?
It's along those lines. It's 8-track versus cassettes. Mm-hmm. It's 8-track. It's the same sort of standards thing all over again. There are alternatives to JavaScript, but none of them won because most of them were worse.
So now we have this system that's set up, and even though it's not a great system, we're stuck with it, or else we'd have to completely rewrite the whole internet?
Basically.
All right.
But there is a standards organization that's making JavaScript better. Since it won, it was taken over by a standards organization, and they've been making improvements to it to make it more and more solid.
So the standards organization, is this a government-run thing, or is it just like a third-party company? What is it?
I believe it's a nonprofit, but I actually don't know how their funding works.
Okay.
I'm pretty
But
sure
it's
they're
like an international conglomerate?
Yeah, and a lot of corporations that are making the browsers subscribe to it. They agree to work with it. So they have the backing of Google and Microsoft and Mozilla, etc. So these groups are all working together to try to make an open, usable internet. Because even in the late 90s, early 2000s, the versions of JavaScript run by Internet Explorer and Mozilla were so different that you had to have two copies of your code, one depending on which browser it was running in.
Yeah, I remember when I was in college, there were certain programs that you literally could not use one or the other. You had to switch back and forth depending on what program it was. We don't have that issue anymore because they've all come to a same.
We don't have that issue with as basic of programs anymore. There are still these extra fancy things you can do that are going to be different between, whatever Internet Explorer decides to call itself this week.
Edge?
Edge, yes.
Yeah.
Edge, and Chrome and Mozilla. When you use those big fancy features, that's dependent on the browser's implementation because they are not a part of the standard. But the standard is broad enough that it covers all of the basic programs you could do in JavaScript.
Okay. So we talked about the different browsers. Is there one that is like definitely the clear front runner as far as quality goes? Security, quickness.
If you had asked me that a year ago, I might have said yes, but no. I don't have one that I would say I use or is superior to the others. I would say it probably alternates between Firefox and Chrome. And I never use Safari and I never use Edge.
Okay. Yeah. For some reason, I got on a Bing thing. I just started using Bing. And now that I'm used to it, I'm just like, what's the difference? Do you think there is a difference between Bing or Google or DuckDuckGo, any of those?
Yes. With like Bing versus DuckDuckGo, what they collect and how they collect is going to be very different. And the same is true between Microsoft and Google. There's going to be variances in quality depending on what you're looking for. But I would be, if you're choosing a search engine, I would be most concerned about what data they're collecting and how they're going to use it.
Which one collects more, do you know?
I would, unless they explicitly say they don't, I assume that they are collecting absolutely everything. And that's
including Safari or any of those?
Well, in terms of search engine, that's going to be...
I guess it'd be Google for Safari, right?
Yeah. Google for Google.com and Microsoft for Bing. I don't believe that Safari has their own search engine.
Well, I guess the default is Google is what I'm trying to get at. Okay. All right. Well, I don't know if I have really any... That's the one question that I've not really been able to answer because I'd like to be an optimist and think like all of these stuff that they're collecting on us is actually pretty convenient. And why do I care if they have it? I don't know. I've never personally experienced anything to where them having all that information has been bad. It's only been positive for me. Yet it seems to be a big cause of concern. Do you find you have that same concern?
Absolutely.
Why?
And let me point out that is why I don't have an Alexa or a Google Home in my house. I do not want to be recorded 24/7. I think that those people having that data, those companies having that data, if they have it, then effectively the United States government has it. And it came up during the Occupy Wall Street protests. It came up that the FBI or NSA, I don't recall. This is a really vague memory from over a decade ago, I think. So forgive me if I get any of the details wrong. They had identified that the West Coast and East Coast organizers had one common link between them. That if they did something to that link, they could cut off a coordination between two large groups of protesters.
What was the link?
A person.
There was
They
one
had the
person that was
social graph.
coordinating the two.
They had so much information about the protesters and their organizations from social networks that they could identify that there were a very small number, if not only one or two, links between large groups of protesters.
Hmm.
Do you know what the FBI did with that data, that kind of information in the 60s?
They did a lot of shit in the 60s.
They tried to get Martin Luther King to kill himself because they illegally searched his mail.
They tried to get him to kill himself?
They tried to blackmail him into killing himself.
I never heard that.
Yeah. Never, ever, ever trust the United States government, in my own opinion, and trust them with as little data as possible.
Don't you think it's a better, and I'm thinking big picture here, and it's not going to happen overnight, and it may never be able to happen. I hope it could, but don't you think it's better to actually focus on the disease instead of these tools that potentially are helpful? Focus on transparency in the government and getting away from what the government was in the 60s, because there is a ton of potential. There's a huge amount of potential, especially when we're talking AI, because the conversations I have about what do you know about the singularity?
Quite a bit.
Tell me what you like the base level, because I'm sure you know more than I do. So I want whoever's listening to kind of have an idea before we get into it.
So I've heard several definitions of singularity, but my understanding of it is the point at which the total sum of computing power is more than that of the human brain.
Oh, I've never heard that definition. That's pretty cool. I like that.
More simply put, when computers can be as smart as we are.
When the horse is out and there's no getting it back is how I've been described. It's to the point where humans are not in the driver's seat anymore. Is that a fair direction, or?
It's defined a little bit differently than that, but it's the point at which that could shift.
Okay. The reason I bring that up, going back to our data collection, is one of the 1,000 reasons that I'm doing this is I believe that it's going to happen. We are on a track of technological exponential growth to the point where we are going to get left in the dust to artificial intelligence.
Are you familiar with Moore's Law?
I'm not.
Moore's Law states that it's put in very dry language, but in effect it means that the power of a single computer will double about every 18 months. A newly built computer.
18 months?
Mm-hmm. And we're approaching...
And there's other parts to it as well. There's the algorithms that go into it. Is that as exponential of growth as well? Or I guess with AI, it's starting to write its own code, right?
There have been some experiments along those lines, I believe, yeah. But I don't know how far they've gotten.
So that just proves my point to where we're not going to keep up. The evolution of humanity is amazing. Humans are the most versatile beings on the planet at the moment. We do some cool stuff. And, we can get into mental health later, but I think that's a big part of it is we're finally getting to the point where technology is outpacing our ability to adapt. And so let's assume we're going to live in our lifetimes in a world where AI does have the potential to, let's just say, take over. It's going to be learning from us, right? It's going to be learning from everything that's input into the system. And so I'd rather have as much good, transparent, kind, positive stuff in the system as possible. And if I want the computer to understand me, I think that I'd probably need to let my information get into the system. And I can understand the fear of the potential dangers that could happen. What are you afraid of in that regard, of letting people, whether it's the NSA or China, know your day-to-day activities?
The power of having that much decision then rests in deciding what's illegal. Because 50 years ago, it was essentially illegal to be gay. And the gay rights organization in the 50s. I'm trying to remember its name. I can remember the leader's name, but not the organization name off the top of my head. They were hiding constantly from the FBI. It was illegal for them, like it was illegal to mail gay porn at the time. It was illegal to be wearing too many garments of the opposite gender in New York at the time. And those laws were all over the US, all over those cities. These are not immoral acts. These are the acts of people just wanting to be themselves. But because we as a culture had decided that those were illegal, if we found those people, we would torture them. That's what was done to gay people. Often their names would be printed in the paper. They would lose access to housing and jobs. And oftentimes they would have to go to mental health asylums. They'd have to go to insane asylums where the most popular forms of gay reparative therapy were being electrocuted until you said you were straight or taking drugs that castrated you. Now,
terrific.
Our society has decided that is no longer counts as a crime. How long would it take for our society to change their mind again? That's what worries me. How many people are... right now, the Republican Party is doing everything it can to target trans people, to vilify trans people. People who have committed no crimes, are doing nothing wrong. I think they're going to fail, but what if they succeeded? They've succeeded in getting a few terrible laws passed.
Wait, what laws have they had passed?
There's a law I believe was passed in Florida. I'd have to look this up, so please don't take this as gospel if I'm wrong about the location or the exact specifics. But it required that any business which allowed trans people to use the appropriate restroom for their gender had to post a sign stating such. In other words, it was a way of shaming trans-friendly businesses and shaming trans people.
It comes down to, does the business care or whether they're being shamed? I mean, if that's who they are and that's who they want to be, and we're in a country where we allow it, I mean, you can see it as a flag of pride.
I mean, some businesses have treated it that way, but there's a lot of problems both legally and ethically, I think, with that law. One of which is your compelling speech, which we have largely considered unacceptable unless it's absolutely necessary.
100% agree.
It isn't in this case.
I would argue it's never, but that's a different discussion that we could get to.
I mean, the requirement of safety warnings and things like that is along the lines of compelled speech, and I don't think has as much problem behind it. Like
safety warnings, what do you mean?
We know that this thing we're selling you is going to cause cancer.
Yeah, so is that compelled speech or is that information, that's education, that's saying, hey, like at the beginning of my show, I have a quote unquote warning. It's like pretty much just so my very religious father doesn't stumble upon one of my episodes where I say fuck. But
so that's allowed. I was worried I was going to have to.
Oh no, you can
myself.
Literally say anything. Does not matter how inflammatory it is. The best part about long form conversations is you can joke and say something, and then 15 years down the line, it'll get pulled up, right? Well, I don't care. In fact, I'm kind of excited to where my show does get canceled. I will happily go back to being a carpenter because that means I made it. If I got too close to the truth or I said something that was just way too out of the line, I'd be kind of happy about that. But I don't think that will happen because I think society is not perfect yet. But I think we're going, like technology, in the right way on an exponential platform. Social norms may not be going as fast as technology, but it is going crazy fast, and I think in the right direction. And the right direction, in my opinion, is 100% free speech, but not with the yelling that we've seen over the last year and a half. I think the last year and a half has made it so apparent to us that we're not getting anywhere by yelling at each other, that I think people are really trying to start sitting down and having conversations. I had a conversation with the brewmaster of Maui Brewing. She's a lesbian, and she said that there was this guy that came up to her, said, "Hey, I've known you for a while, and I wanted to thank you because before I knew you, I was very against homosexuals being able to adopt kids. I thought it was terrible, and God was against it, and I never would have supported it till I met you." Him being able to be educated and being open and being able to talk about that changed who he was on a very core level. And I really think that right now the direction that society is going, at least in most of the world, there's a lot of exceptions, like the conversation I had with my friend from China. It's a little bit different over there, but we do have a country where we can finally be who we want to be. And it allows people who, although it may be scary and they might get some backlash, we do have the support system to stand up and say, "Hey, I am different." And so that's why, going back to the whole thing that started this, the collecting of data, I'm wondering maybe they're not there yet. Maybe our government really has this seedy underbelly that's kind of working itself out. But I think we have technology on our side. We have the ability to actually have transparency. So if something came up, like the example you gave of the two sides with that one node in the middle, that came out. We learned it. And now the fuckery that's happening in the government, they're starting to realize they can't get away with murder anymore. So I don't know if I'm all aboard the let's just open up our lives and trust each other to change the laws, but I hope we could probably get there someday.
So I think that a lot has to happen on a societal level first. Because like that kind of data, if you've ever cheated once, they could figure that out and use that against you. Or how many people not only would be terrified to have it revealed that they look at porn, but what porn they look at. And that is the data that your ISP, your government, your browser, your search browser can know about you.
I've found it very interesting as I travel across the U.S. talking to people that are very far left, very far right, gay, straight, all in between. We all have these little hidden things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my personal self-experiment is trying to be as, I guess, what's the word? Exposed isn't the one I'm looking for, but that kind of captures it. I've shared stuff about myself that I was incredibly uncomfortable sharing. When I ended up sharing it, A, the fear went away, but B, other people said, "Oh, dude, me too. Oh, me too, me too." And all of a sudden you see this weird thing like porn. I went through hell as a kid because I thought I was the only kid in school that was weak enough to look at, something like that. And when I found out that not only was that common, it was actually super rare that someone didn't, it completely changed the way I viewed myself in a very good way.
Did you grow up in Utah?
Yeah. Well, no. I was born in Utah when I was, I think, 3 or 4. My family moved to Colorado. So up until, I think, 2nd grade, I was Colorado. 3rd through 9th grade, I was Wyoming. A year in Arizona for 9th grade, and then high school back in Utah. So I went through I was the outcast because I was Mormon. And then I moved to the place where if you weren't Mormon, you were the outcast, right? So I've kind of lived on both sides of that. I've been the bully, I've been the bullied. And it's, shoot, what were we talking about? I went on a nice little soapbox, didn't I?
We were talking about details that you wouldn't necessarily want people to know about you.
Yes. So my point is, I don't think we're there yet, but I think if we can start forgiving ourselves and others for the shit that we've done, and that goes for everyone, including the deep state, the guys that are doing this. Luckily, most of the people back in the 60s are either dead or out of the organization now, because that's like 20 episodes worth of podcasting just talking about the crap that went on from the United States government in the name of good and the moral high ground, which ended up being completely evil and awful.
And I would argue it never stops. We think it stops, and then we find out a few years later everything our government was doing. Every era of American history is marred by horrific actions of the United States government.
But think large scale. How long have we actually had the ability that we have now to communicate with each other and expose corruption for what it is? Very, very minuscule speck in the long, even in a young country like the US, what it's been 200 years. Oh crap. 1776, when we 250 years around there. Mm-hmm. Hey, our 250 year mark's coming up. That's going to be exciting. We've only had like social media, for example, I think is the thing that we're talking about. We're able to expose these terrible corruptions that are in our government. What's it really only been around a couple decades?
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're going through a really rough growing pain right now. We've been proven that we can't trust each other. And so we're going to hold on and hold on and hold on. But I think there's going to be a tipping point to where we're like, maybe if I let go a little bit and trust people around me, they aren't going to judge me. And we've actually changed the laws to where there isn't, or we're close to not having systemic racism or systemic hate against people of different sexual biases. And I think once we kind of start getting there, that's just going to be contagious. And we're going to be like, all right, now that we don't fear the negative side of what this could be, the Black Mirror episodes, the negative side of all this crazy technology that's coming out, how can we harness it for badassery? And that's what I'm hoping. I hope I'm right.
I find it's hard to stay an optimist, but I really am an optimist, even if I don't talk about it. Because my hopes and dreams come from things like Star Trek and Stargate, where amazing technology can be used for the human good. And unfortunately, I think that, especially lately, I've gotten a little bit more distrusting of people in groups. Simply because I think we are both allowing ourselves and intentionally manipulating ourselves with social media for our own detriment. And because it's a new tool that we don't as a culture understand yet. So we're letting it wreak havoc. But so did radio or nuclear technology for the first 40 years before we started to clean it up and use it more reasonably and more sensibly. We're still on the verge of blowing ourselves up for no good reason, and needlessly contaminating our world, but we're learning to use the technology reasonably. So I agree that we are in a you might call it an adolescent phase with the internet, where we are having what has been clashing against what could be and the tools we can use for it.
The important thing, I think, is the momentum or the direction where we're going. Because yes, there is terrible stuff that happens. There will continue to be terrible things that happen. But I think as we learn more about ourselves, about the culture we're in, about others, we choose to do good more often than not. The crap that happens, I think, on a large scale is because we didn't know better, or maybe a core belief that was pounded into our heads as a child drove our actions. And if you take away that belief, all of a sudden you look back and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I acted that way. I think most of the fuck ups in our life is because we just didn't know. Or people have been just stepped on and chewed up by a machine or a system, or they weren't the same. And so they now have quote unquote proof that the world is evil and they're justified in acting in terrible ways. I think school shootings are the perfect example for that. Most of those kids were marginalized. Most of them had some depression and were on some sort of, and I don't think SSRIs are causing it, but I think the core issue behind it, the traumas that cause the anxiety and depressions, that is a huge similarity between most of these mass shootings. We can talk about gun control all day long, but you can take away the tools, you're still going to have a human being behind this pain and hurt. And I think going back to the optimistic side, we've never had the ability to educate on a mass scale like we do now. And so the question we need to ask ourselves is, are we actually going to be responsible with it and do the hard thing, which is use this correctly? Because mark my words here, this is something that I'm very certain of, even though this is one thing I don't think all people agree with me on. And maybe this is just going back to the optimist, but I think it's an inevitability, is people are going to start realizing that for the first time in history, you can actually have a real democracy. And I'm not even sure if that's the right way to say it. I think people are going to realize that the individual has more power than they give themselves credit for. And the technologies that we have now and will continue to have are going to amplify that. And I think our actions right now with social media are because we don't think they have that much power. What we click on, literally how long we look at a video, it's down to that science already. Literally how long we gaze at a video, whether it's 1 second or 30 seconds, is going into a system that is driving a lot of our lives right now. And I think what we need to start talking about and having a hard discussion about is, what am I allowing myself to click on? Because what you're clicking on, you are perpetuating. If you're clicking on the riot side of if there's a BLM movement and all you're reading is the articles about, bags of shit lit on fire thrown at houses, then that is what drives the almighty dollar, and that's what they're going to be reporting on. And so we're going to have this terrible viewpoint of what's going on out there. But if you walk through the Chaz zone and without social media involved, and you're personally there and you say, oh, this isn't that bad, you're going to have a completely different view from what I got, which down in Texas, you hear about Chaz zone and it's just people shitting on the street and fighting each other. And it was this terrible mess.
Are you familiar with the word memetics?
Memetics?
Mm-hmm. It's from the same word, root word as meme, which I believe is French for idea. Memetics is the study of how ideas move through populations. And it sort of treats every idea like a virus or a germ. So when you communicate that to another person, you are transmitting that germ. And social media is a super spreader event.
Oh, yeah.
You are exposing all kinds of people to it. Now, there are positive sides and negative sides to what we can share there. One of the negative sides is ideas have a way of evolving when they're retransmitted. So think of it like a cat photo. And somebody thinks it's hilarious, but would be a little bit more hilarious if they added a caption. Well, that mutates that germ, and now they're going to spread that new copy of the germ, and it's going to remutate and remutate and remutate until the most perfect form of it to spread to as many people as possible evolves. And that's the viral version of the meme. So one thing that can happen with this is that they can evolve to generally evoke emotion, because emotion is why you share something. Emotion is why you click on something. And in particular, negative emotions are a really good way of doing that, especially anger or, I'll go with anger. So imagine that there is do you use Facebook?
I do.
So you know how there will be an image of a news article?
Mm-hmm.
It's not the text, it's just the image.
Yeah.
Imagine that one of those is out there and it tells a reasonable, fair, and balanced story about, some particular clash between Black Lives Matter protesters and riot police. And there are a couple of details in there that are inflammatory, but it's a reasonable article. Well, somebody's going to say, well, I don't want to talk about what the police did. I only care about what the protesters did to the police. And then they're going to share that. And then somebody's going to open that up and they're going to say, oh, this isn't quite what happened. And they're going to edit it and they're going to say, make it just what they think is a little bit more accurate, but it makes that image each time just a little bit more enraging. And the more enraging it becomes, the more shared it will be. So, as a part of social media, without realizing it, we are the machine as much as we are the inputs to the machine. We are creating the slightly more angering versions, the slightly more transmittable versions of ideas.
I agree. There's something I heard about this video that went crazy viral. It was a cop that had a baggie and threw it in some guy's car. And the guy's like, you just planted that on me. And it got sent out to people and they said, see, this is why cops are evil. Cops are terrible. And then you get the full video and you see that the cop pulled that from the guy's pocket and on the different cams said, whatever, this was in your pocket. I'm putting it in your back seat. It was empty anyway. So it's not like he was planning anything. So that's a perfect example of people are actively going out of their way to perpetuate this. And I think it's because it works. Mm-hmm. Because you and I look at it. Because we want to be incensed, right?
Fox News did this intentionally. They put up an article about Black Lives Matter's protests in the Chaz zone, and they took different photos from a different protest of armed protesters and put that on that news article.
It's bullshit.
It's bullshit.
It's awful.
It was meant to make people angry and scared because that's what Fox News needs in order for people to listen to their bullshit.
And let's be fair, there's two sides to every coin. And
yes, absolutely. And don't let me pretend that there isn't.
We can name every single mainstream news source. Hell, you can name iaWoodstock. We're all going to have biases. The problem with that is we have an organization in Fox News, or the other side of the coin, let's just call it CNN, but most other news sources, which are very liberal,
I think MSNBC would probably be the closest liberal.
Are they the most extreme side?
The most I can think of, but...
Either way, they are doing the same thing that you were talking about with the meme. They are fighting for airtime. And when you're fighting for airtime, you want to throw that thing when it... I learned the phrase the other day, if it bleeds, it leads. You ever heard that?
I haven't.
Pretty much if it's this terrible, awful thing, no one looks at cars driving on the road, but if there's a car accident, you're going to be staring at it, right? So, and they are fighting for the same click, the same 30 seconds, right? And so when I bring up this idea, I get accused of being an ostrich or putting my head in the sand, and I don't think it is. And hopefully I can convey why, but the only answer to having all media stop that is us not looking at it. As long as we are buying it, someone's going to keep selling it. That's why the war on drugs doesn't work. If Americans are buying drugs, they're going to buy drugs.
I would argue the war on drugs doesn't work for an entirely different reason.
It's not
designed to.
Oh, let's get on that real quick. But to put a pin in this last part, I believe it is possible if we start talking about this outside of the memeverse, outside of the 100 little words or whatever you have on Twitter, which I don't use Twitter. I use Facebook as hey, I haven't seen you in 10 years. Let's do a podcast. It's a great tool. I'll use it I won't use it for news because I've already gone down that path and I've realized that that's just trash. And all it is it's just swaying your emotion and it's not right.
Right. It's when you see an article, a news article, a meme, click hide this post.
Exactly. And let's trust the algorithm and take some responsibility ourselves, because who is creating what that algorithm does? You yourself just said we are the input as well as we are creating what this whole algorithm sees as valuable. If we're staying on because we're looking at our family's pictures versus we're staying on because we're looking at beheadings over in Afghanistan, then that algorithm is going to say, all right, guys, more family pictures. That's what's going to keep them on. It's a hold ourselves responsible for once and say, oh, this world is in a shitty spot and I'm actually to blame for it. and be okay with that, because we're all shitheads. We're all morons. We need to admit it and realize, okay, now that I know that, let's try to hold back a little bit. Let's try to set my phone down a little bit more. If I am using it, let's use it for something that's positive. Unless you're just a troll, that's fun too, but you're an asshole and stop doing it. But I think there is a way out, and I think people don't act that way because they don't believe there is a way out.
So I agree with you that not using Facebook for news or like videos of things happening in places is exactly what we need to do. We need to stop letting that control how we see the world. And I agree. What we need to do with it is just stop consuming it and hide it. But on the other side of the coin, we don't need social media to do this. This idea of memetics, once I learned about it, I saw this happen in person in a real friend group. And being educated about it helped me understand what was happening. Because every week my friends would get together, and invariably a conversation about one person would come up. We all had conflicts with him. None of us liked him. And yet, once I realized what was happening, every one of those conversations, the description, the image we were building of that person was less and less and less like the real person.
Wow.
You've heard the saying, if you look in a room and nobody else is the asshole, then you're the asshole.
Yeah.
It's that kind of idea. I was watching this happen to a person, that we were outgrouping him. That idea of him was festering, and we were evolving it in each conversation to be more extreme than anything that guy had ever done deserved.
And it brought you all together.
I did everything I could to kill the conversation after that. Once I realized what was happening, I stopped it. Because we were going to toss that guy out of this group, or out of the group. We were going to cut off what was maybe his only positive social outlet for what in the grand scheme of things were a few shitty things he had said. And admittedly, they were shitty things. One of them that comes to mind was his response to a rape victim talking about being raped was, you should have fought harder. That is an asshole thing to say, and it's completely unacceptable. However, if we educated him not to say that again, there's no reason to kick him out of a perfectly accepting social group.
When we have people losing their jobs, like I think the Jeopardy host they chose, apparently he resigned because in 2014 he said something on a podcast that was, I guess, I don't know what he said, but it was something against women or whatever, right? Thank God I didn't have Twitter or Facebook back when I was a teenager, because I did grow up in a very different life than what I live now. I was a terrible person. The way I treated people was horrific. The words that I used, I would straight up call people faggots all the time. And I use it now because I think that we need to understand that we are bigger than words. In fact, I had a great conversation. He was a hairstylist down in Texas, where he was the only gay kid, the first gay kid to ever come out in this small town. It's called Yorktown, this teeny tiny little town. Still to this day, it's just a tiny little blip on the radar. And he was I believe he was adopted kid that everyone close to him knew, but he was the first one that came out. And so we had this very open conversation about words, and the one that comes to mind is him being able to call women bitches. Because he's gay, super flamboyant, very nice guy. He'll cut some girl's hair and it's amazing. He's like, "Oh, you look great, bitch." And that's totally cool. And then he went down to Mexico and he thought, he was learning his Spanish. So he's like, "Hasta luego, putas." And everyone in the place looked at him like he had just gone fucking insane. And so it's when you use
To be fair, bitch and puta do have slightly different meanings.
It does. Well, bitch has different meanings depending on where you are, who you're talking to. There's so much nuance in every word that we use.
Absolutely.
And that's why, not to plug what I'm doing, but I think that's why podcasting is now the up and coming thing. It's growing so fast. People, I think I read that there's like 260 million people in the US that listen to podcasts, and on average they listen to 7, which is weird to me because up until last year, I had never even listened to a podcast. Someone sent me a link and I sat and listened to this 2-hour conversation where if you took any 30-second clip of it, you could have spun that conversation any way you want. But knowing the background of who they were, having them explain themselves when they misspeak, and just the tone, it completely changed. It went from a little brushstroke to this big tapestry, and you can actually start getting some real information instead of I saw a headline and now I know what's going on at the border. And that's why I'm very hopeful, because we have this mix right now of technology taking off, but we're harnessing it in these ways to where we actually can communicate better. And the next step is trying to figure out how to communicate in Mandarin, because that's going to be the conversation I had earlier today was, we're talking about, not trusting our government. He said, yeah, the government's fine there. We have food and everything, but they control 100% of the media. And so if you're in China, you only know what the government wants you to know. And we're kind of fine with that. And I'm like, how are you fine with that? Like, what if homosexuality came to mind? I'm like, well, what if your government said you can't be openly gay?
So today in China, it is illegal to publish or sell any books talking about homosexuality or gay romance novels, anything like that. Because homosexuality does not further the public good, I believe is what it was. I might be misquoting that a little bit. But I learned that while I was in Beijing. That the reason I go to gay neighborhoods and I find bookstores and I buy books from every city I visit. I couldn't find a gay neighborhood in Beijing, and I couldn't find one of those books at any bookstore I looked for because they're not there. You have to by law. You have to find a black market book dealer, which I wasn't good enough to find.
And you'd probably go to jail if you were found. See that?
No, I don't think they'd have jailed me. They'd have jailed the seller.
Yeah, because we talked a little bit about religion. He's a Mormon, the Chinese guy, and I kind of asked him, like, well, how do they? Because what I didn't know, they treat communism as a religion, like that's the state religion, communism. Even though I don't really follow communism, that's the crazy thing about China.
Well, how many Christians follow Christianity?
Yeah, there we go.
It's nominal at best.
and which version of Christianity?
Mm-hmm.
But that's why I think we have to, if we're going to pass along information to the next generation, the written word was a great tool. It helped humanity get past a lot of shit and passing a lot of information. But boy, did it really screw us up too. Because we wrote something down. That's assumed Jesus was an enlightened guy and he was really teaching good quality ways to live a better life. That's not what arrived to 2021 through the Bible. I mean, I don't know how many iterations it has, but the hate that's come out of something that teaches peace and charity. Thank you, written word, but I think you've served your purpose, right? And so when we're talking about passing good information, what's really the best way? And I think it's face-to-face, in-person, word of mouth, because there's feelings that you have that you can't put on a piece of paper.
So I agree with you about communicating in person, communicating something that is very, very difficult, nay, impossible to get with the written word. But I would separate that from the value of information on paper, because I think the biggest solution for the biggest problems that the Bible created was the Gutenberg press. It was the democratization of that information. It was the average person being able to read in their own home.
You think that was the downside of it?
No, I think that was the correction for what was done with the handwritten Bibles and the elitism of the church in Europe. It was allowing everyone to read that. And I am an atheist. I do not any further believe in the Bible as a religious document, but it is a valuable object of literature. And what I see when I see somebody spouting hate from the Bible is they have projected their hate into that text. It's there. There's definitely hate and violence and things that I would not ascribe to in the Bible. But they have chosen to focus and to repeat that hatred. It was a choice that they are making. They are not just following the word of God. They are choosing to be hateful.
Maybe let me explain myself a little bit more on that. When you talk about information versus understanding, you can pass along information and it's in a written form, it becomes static at that point. And your interpretation of that information is going to differ from one person to the other, right?
Absolutely.
And so even if you write down a good, pure idea in that snapshot of time and the understanding, say the 1800s, this is how we spoke, this is what this word meant. In 2020, it is very much not what that word meant. And like the word gay, it's changed how many times? The word nigger, it's changed. It used to be okay to say that in certain places. Now, just me saying it now, it made me like my hands are sweaty because it's such a trigger word, right?
It's so charged.
I've now said faggot and nigger on the same podcast.
Can I balance things out and start talking about, have you heard the word breeder as a swear word?
What's that?
To quote an author named Dan Savage, it's gay people's hate word for you. Which he usually follows up with, okay, never mind. It's an acknowledgement of your utility.
Well, with technology, gays are going to be breeders too.
There have been some very good advancements in that technology, yes.
Well, maybe that's a meme right there. Our hate is eventually going to swallow us whole. Anytime that we're pointing someone, there's four fingers pointing back at us. That's great. A breeder. One of my favorites I heard from an Australian. It's Ranger.
I haven't heard that one.
It's short for orangutan. It's what they call redheads.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was always. But you have to hear an Aussie say it. Like I can't do the accent right. I'd completely sound like an idiot. But there was a topic that I wanted to touch on, and now I'm drawing a blank.
Well, I feel like we really haven't talked about like how to write code. We quickly got distracted from it.
Well, let me give what I think code is, and then we can add on to it. It's started off with ones and zeros, to where, like you said, you give a very specific direction and a certain, I guess, this is why I have you on, because I think I understand the basics of it. It's pretty much 1, 0 in a certain order means a certain thing. But then when you add that on times 1,000,000, you can create this huge masterpiece of something that's going to eventually show up into a visual form or sound that we can actually interact with.
So yeah, like I said, don't focus on the ones and zeros. It's not helpful when you want to learn to code.
Because whoever came up with the whole Java, that's what I'm talking about, right? Someone actually had to go from ones and zeros to, all right, here's a format that an actual human can translate into a computer language. And then we're talking about Java, JavaScript, Python, and C++. C++. Those are all different languages?
Yeah.
Am I on the right track?
There are hundreds of languages. All have different design features. Most of them have different design goals. If you're learning to program, I would stick to languages like JavaScript or Python.
JavaScript or Python.
Those are two of the most common languages to learn first. JavaScript because it's used everywhere and it's really easy to get started. Python is not quite as easy to get started, but still pretty easy. And there's a lot of tutorials and here's how you do things based on it.
So what are video games typically written in?
Most video games are going to be written in C or C++.
Okay.
let me take a step back. Modern video games are so complicated that they are actually probably written in 3 to 4 languages at any given time. So a graphics engine, the kind of thing that tells how shiny your sword is and tells where to render it, is probably going to be written in C or C++, which are very, very similar languages.
Then, is there a C+?
No.
So it went to double plus right off the bat?
Double plus has a specific meaning. It means add 1.
I'll trust you on that one.
Yeah, so this is a thing in programming. If you take a variable and you can do variable equals variable plus 1, so C equals C plus 1. So rather than having to write all that, they added what's called syntax sugar. They shortened that to be C++.
Okay.
So it's just add 1 to C.
I have no idea what any of that means at all.
Okay. So
and I don't think it really matters, because that comes down to I just need to learn coding if I want to know what that actually means, right?
Probably, but I can explain what all of it means pretty easily.
Okay.
Have you ever played around with like a fancy calculator like TI-85, take calculus in college, anything like that?
Yeah. You play the little Mario games on it?
Yeah, exactly. You know how you could assign a letter to mean a certain value?
Like just a variable, like you had in just a typical formula?
Exactly. Okay. So in nearly every programming language, I want to say every programming language, but I know there's going to be exceptions. You have variables. A letter that represents, or a name that represents some value that you don't know when you're writing the program. So if you have a variable called C, and you want to add 1 to it, you could say that as C equals, which is how you assign, C plus 1. So that just takes whatever value's in C, adds 1, and puts it back in the value C. Or we have this special syntax that most languages support, where you can just do C++ as a shorthand. It's a way of making things faster and easier. And those are sometimes called syntax sugars, because they make it sweeter to work with.
All right. And these different languages, they have to be able to interact with each other if they're all in the same video game?
Yes. So interacting with each other is going to be dependent on like how the game is built, but usually you have different software components like the rendering engine, and you have the game logic engine is usually in something. A language called Lua is popular for that. And then you might have a database language. A lot of games use databases in them. And databases use a special kind of language called a query language. So will often appear in games as they save things like you've got 50 experience points. They're not just saving that in memory or writing a custom file. They're writing into a database. And then I said 4, didn't I? What was I thinking when I said 4? There will also be what are called shaders. Your graphics card implements a specific kind of language called a shader. And so you'll often have that in your game engine as well.
How close do you think we are to having... Are you familiar with Ready Player One, the book?
Mm-hmm. I've seen the movie. I admittedly have not read the book.
So the general idea is that we could, sitting here, this could be a virtual reality. It's going to get to the point where it's as if we're in their haptic suits, etc. Do you think we're close?
Hard to say, but I'd bet within a couple of years we'd have something that would approach that. It depends on like how real of an environment you're talking about. But you can see I've got a VR setup sitting right behind me. Yes, you can play with it before you leave if you want to. So it has its flaws, it has its problems, it has things where it's clearly not reality. There's limits to how dense we can make the screen. There's limits to how fast we can process that environment. But like I said, we're still following Moore's law. We're doubling about every 18 months. So the computational power to do something like a haptic suit, not a problem. The problem with like real texture and touch is how do you do the different textures? As far as I know, we don't have a material that we could send an electrical signal through and change its texture on a fine grain. We've got some things that might work out that way in the long run, but none of them are on the kind of scale that you could put them at your fingertips and feel like you were touching something specific.
Yeah, I think when we're really going to take a big stride is when we forget about the traditional inputs, vision, touch, and we go straight into the brain. And Neuralink, I've talked a lot about on the show. We're actually going to have the ability at some point to transfer information directly from our brain into a technological interface. I think that's really when shit's going to get crazy, because you talked about being an atheist. Do you believe that there's any life after death, or this life is just click, we're done?
I have no evidence to believe that there's a life after death, and I wouldn't really expect any anyway.
Yeah, there's no evidence on either way. I hope there's something. Like people have postured that there may be, we are currently in a simulation. I think that's just wishful thinking of that death isn't the end. Mm-hmm. I hope there's something out there, because if not, I guess I'm starting down a path of actually living life to the fullest, so I'm not too worried about it.
If there's life after death, I will be pleasantly surprised. Or unpleasantly surprised. I can't remember who said this, but I wish I could. There is a famous man once said, should I die and meet God after death, he would have a lot of explaining to do.
Oh, man. I think anyone who claims that they know what's going on in this life is very short-sighted, and probably lives a small life. Unfortunately, that's been most of my life. And the problem, I think, is it's terrifying to think otherwise. It's really comforting to think you have the answers.
It is. It's terrifying to realize that we actually know, on the grand scale of things, almost nothing.
Yeah.
It's disconcerting to think that we are hurtling around the sun on a planet spinning, God knows, well, God. I can't quote how many miles an hour we're moving on the surface. I can't quote how many miles an hour we're moving around the sun, or how fast our entire solar system is hurtling through our galaxy, and nobody's driving. That idea can be extremely uncomfortable.
And to even muddy the waters more, I've been having conversations with people about how science is amazing. I think that science should be a big focal point of how humans move forward, because the idea of science is peers being able to review information that they can repeat, right? But we're talking about hurtling through the space. This is all still theory. There's nothing proven. It's all, we've done these tests and they keep coming back. But the more we understand in any arena, the more we realize, oh, we don't know. And so how does that not apply to us being flung through the air? I think it's very juvenile, and like the hypocrisy in it, it's crazy. I think on the scientific side and the religious side, and it goes back and forth over generations of, this is why you're wrong. No, this is why you're wrong. And it's just back and forth. And I'm like, hey guys, you're probably both wrong, and you're probably both right in a lot of ways. And I think it just comes down to semantics. And I've used to think a lot, and I still think to a point. It's not a great metaphor, but I think religion is the answers at the end of the textbook, and science is working your way through it. And the downside of religion is, like I was talking about with the written word, is people claiming that they know what that is. I know what this answer means, but they never actually worked their way through the textbook.
Yeah. My primary problem with religion is religious people. And I don't mean that in the broad sense. I mean that in the sense of the kinds of people who are standing at a pulpit. And I don't mean a religious pulpit. I mean on a political landscape, and they are trying to make laws against gay people or trans people or Muslims or black people, because that's what their religion in their mind says they should do. Those are the people I have problems with. I
have a problem with forcing people to do shit. I think that goes for all things. If you disagree with me, that's fine. We can find a way to coexist. And sometimes it's just not be near each other. But the mandates of that's one thing. Like, I don't want to talk more about COVID because I've just talked about it way too much and I'm just so sick and tired of it. But it's like the mask and the vaccine thing. I get both sides. I really do. Mm-hmm. One side is we trust the science and there's no reason not to get the vaccine because, yeah, there is a potential harm. You could potentially die from it, but my nephew could die from cashews as well, right? And that's just how life is. Deal with it. But the large grand majority, no, it's safe. Deal with it. But on the other side, it's why are you forcing people to take something that we don't know for certain whether it's going to have a side effect down the road? You're going to keep me from letting my kid go to school. You're going to keep me from going into gyms and restaurants and all this stuff, things that I have paid taxes towards my whole life. And you're going to keep me from doing it because I don't agree with you on something. Well, so I can see both sides to it.
The agreement there, that's the problem. The problem is that there's always going to be a class of people who cannot take the vaccine. They are allergic to it, or they have a known condition that is going to make it impossible for them to take that, or they are otherwise immunocompromised. They're never going to be able to take the vaccine. The only way those people are ever going to be safe is if basically everybody else does. So
that would be the case if the vaccine were like the smallpox vaccine and it actually eradicated the disease.
True.
I think we have enough information to know that's not the case.
It doesn't eradicate the disease, but it makes infection and severe disease so unlikely that it puts it more in the realm of a regular flu than it does COVID.
That doesn't address the initial argument that you had, though. If I have the vaccine, so I've had COVID, so I have natural antibodies, and I've had 2 doses of the Moderna. I am being told, and we have pretty good information for me to believe, that I could still get COVID and pass that to someone who, like you were saying, might be allergic to the vaccine. I don't know how we would know if they're allergic to the vaccine and why they get a pass, and other people don't. But
especially immunocompromised people have well-documented cases where conditions where they can't take that vaccine because of its ingredients, or they're just simply immunocompromised, so the vaccine wouldn't work, period. And we know that.
How do they know? Because maybe
HIV?
That's something like, well, there are a lot of people screaming out there that the vaccine has caused a lot of issues, right?
It's caused some, definitely.
And I can say, hey, it could be circumstantial. It could have just, that was going to happen to you on Tuesday anyways. You just happened to take the vaccine Monday. I don't know. I don't know if there's any way to know, but if we're concerned about people who are immunocompromised, these other people, how do they know that they're not going to have an adverse reaction as well? And I could understand if it was smallpox, I think is a great way to kind of mitigate the conversation, because we have to realize that all diseases are not the same. All vaccines don't work. With smallpox, you had a very high death rate. It was miserable. It was incredibly infectious. Mm-hmm. And the vaccine actually kept you from getting it and spreading it. And so we eradicated it, right? In that case, I agree with you. I think that argument holds water. What doesn't hold water to me is this immunocompromised person is still going to get COVID from someone who has full vaccination.
Well, let me take that case. Let's just talk about that. Let's assume that you have a school with one immunocompromised child. It could be a host of conditions that made them immunocompromised, but under normal circumstances, without COVID, they could be in school relatively safely. Now, let's say that every other child around them is vaccinated. So the chances of one person, a vaccinated person, being infected by COVID, let's say it cuts it from, let's say they have contact with another person who has COVID, this one child. And I don't know the transmission rates, but it's significant.
And that's the problem, is no one knows yet. We can make models in our head, but we're all using our own numbers.
There have been varying estimates over COVID, and I know that the Delta variant is much more transmissible, but let's just pick a number and say that there's a 50% chance that person who has COVID gave that child who's vaccinated COVID. So they got it, even though they were vaccinated. So they are now contagious. And they have a class over here with 15 other students. Now, each one of those students has, let's say, a 1% chance of contracting COVID from that student. So one of those students now shares a class with our immunocompromised student, and that 1% chance is what we have to worry about. But if you take your step back and you say nobody at that school is vaccinated, now you have 50% chance, 50% chance. The chances of that immunocompromised person being infected are orders of magnitude higher than if the other students had been vaccinated.
And that's if those numbers were true, though. And the problem is we don't know. We don't have those numbers. It could be 100% and 100%. The hard part about this is half the people are asymptomatic. So the numbers we have, really, we can just throw out the window because we do not have good data on this disease.
That's going to be a consistent problem, but we have to move forward with the best estimates that we've got. Because if we wait to be absolutely sure of the numbers, we're never going to reopen, because it could be years of studying this disease to know every possible effect it has and every possible transmissibility rate.
So I guess the argument, it's not whether you feel we should get vaccinated. The argument is whether it should be mandated.
I think that any public space, and any school, things like that, should absolutely have the right to mandate vaccines or masks or both. That in order to participate in that, you have to, as much as possible, protect the other people involved in it. And that's what masks are about. They're not about protecting you. They're about protecting the people around you.
Masks, I think there's no argument. That's just, they use the slippery slope thing. If you let them take away this, you're going to take something else. And so they're using that as a stepping stool to the vaccine. The mask, who cares if it's a little uncomfortable. Yes, I hated it. It's inconvenient. I'm a social guy. I like seeing smiles. You can't communicate as well. It sucks, but it's really not that big of an inconvenience. That's just,
right. I can't wait for masks not to be necessary anymore. I hate them.
The argument against masks is just, you're just lazy, right? The vaccine, though, that's one where I'm not an anti-vaxxer. I've had pretty much every vaccination under the sun. I've lived in Brazil, so I had to get literally pretty much everything. I'm perfectly fine. Maybe I'd be Superman if I didn't get them. I don't know. But I am very pro-vaccination. I'm very pro-science. I think that vaccines make adults, as the bumper sticker says on the car that was in front of me yesterday.
I like that saying.
The part that I can't agree with, and it's one of those, like free speech, I don't think there is much ambiguity. I don't think we should be censoring things. And that's the conversation I wanted to have. We can segue into that, but I don't think mandates, I just don't think that mandates like that on something that we truly, time's going to tell, right? And I think both sides are going to be able to say, see, I told you so. That's the conversation I want to have.
It's entirely possible that there are going to be long-term effects from the vaccine. It's
like you're trading one for the other. It's like the thing that gets me and why I seem to give some license to the side that is super anti against it is because normally if you follow the money, that kind of tells a bit of a story. And everything about this whole situation shouts there are people who are taking advantage of a great situation to get filthy rich off of this.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of evidence showing that we could have changed, not thrown trillions of dollars into a vaccine, but actually given people vitamin D and told people to go outside and get sun and exercise. And we'd have a lot less damage to the society than we had. I hope the vaccine, and I believe I had it myself. My wife's had it. I believe that there's nothing I'm not going to die in 2 years as I've been told I will. A very good friend of mine actually said, "Oh my gosh, you took it," and I saw the fear on his face. The blood drained from his face. He legitimately thinks that I'm going to be dead in 2 years. I don't believe that, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I definitely understand the argument on that side. And it's if there's a chance that me or my family is going to get hurt from this vaccine, you're talking about percentages, 1%, 1%, 1%, even though it's a very small chance. It's a selfish thing to do, but I'd rather have that 1% for me than some person I don't know that's immunocompromised. And
as far as I'm concerned, that's fine. But don't send your kids to school. Like you have a choice. You're always going to have a choice. Nobody's going to send police to your door with vaccines to shove them into your kids' arms. It's not going to happen. But if you want your kids to participate in schools, they're going to have to get vaccinated. My sister works in a biotech lab in Southern California and in a hospital. And she's a workaholic. She didn't want to take the time off from the potential illness to get vaccinated. My sister is an extreme workaholic. But what finally convinced her was the hospital was going to say that you either get vaccinated or you have to get tested for COVID every week and have the health and safety department of the hospital sign off on those results. So that inconvenience was enough to convince her to get the vaccine. She had a choice. She chose to keep her job and to not have to get tested every week.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of problems with that. And especially coming from someone who was marginalized even, 40, 50 years ago, you couldn't be who you want to be in a situation because a government agency mandated certain things that we all agree now are completely wrong. It comes down to, I guess, whether we trust that government. And you're in one sentence saying you don't trust them at all, but in another sentence you're saying you really do.
I'm saying be suspicious, read the data, read about the vaccine, but I don't have a problem with vaccine mandates in schools because there will always be private schools that don't mandate them. You have a choice, especially, I think you were talking about Texas. Texas, I think, is very particular about putting public school funds into charter schools is the word I'm trying to think of. And as I understand it, now I might be a little misinformed on this, a lot of those charter schools are not having those same mask or vaccine mandates.
And that's what I can totally get behind. We're talking about federal control versus state control versus community control. And I'm all about taking power down to the actual community because we all do have different likes and interests, and we shouldn't be forced to live in a certain place where we don't want to live. And I'd rather not leave the US. I ran across some people that I mentioned that I owned guns, and they looked at me like I was legit evil. And they said, "This is why we're leaving this country. People like you. I'm not going to live here because of you're pretty much a criminal for owning guns." And I was just like taken aback because I was like having this great conversation with them at first. And then they turned it into where I'm like this bad person because I own a piece of metal that literally sits in storage now. I haven't seen those guns in forever. Kind of sad. I haven't shot them. But what's your take on gun laws?
Mixed and complicated. I find that gun control laws usually don't have the effect that we intend them to have. And the lack of gun control laws tends not to have the effect that we want it to have. I think we have a cultural problem with firearms and mass shootings, and that it doesn't really matter what laws we pass about guns if we're not willing to address it. But I also believe very powerfully in the right of self-defense.
Yeah, the gun one, I don't even like talking about because it's like, oh, there's so much other more important issues in my opinion. I think school shootings are horrific, and it's an easy thing to throw that headline up, back to that. But if we're talking sheer numbers, I mean, let's talk about drunk driving. I mean, let's talk about driving, period. We're talking about the percentage chance that someone immunocompromised gets a virus that only has a 0.1% chance of killing you in the first place, yet we choose to get in a car that has a lot higher death rate. So it's like, that's the hard part for me, is like, we're so focused on these things that I'm like, well, why aren't we focusing on the hundreds of thousands of millions of people that are dying from opioid overdose every year? I mean, why aren't we talking more about that? And that's why I think my show, although I came into this with no agenda, has turned into like, I feel like I'm a drug pusher now, because everyone I talk to is having these mental health issues, and everyone also is talking about how they're very interested in psychedelics because they're having these huge strides in, like, I was talking to you earlier off the microphone about a buddy that had crippling depression. I'm talking, the example he gave is he was walking on a beach in Southern California with his wife and kid. Everything was perfect. And I can't remember his exact words. I need to go back and listen to it. It was pretty much, he was empty inside. He could have died and it wouldn't have been a big deal. And only through a psychedelic, something that you mentioned a friend of yours uses just recreationally, that is seen as like a irresponsible drug. His words were, it saved my life. And other guys, like vets from different horrific experiences over in the military, using ayahuasca one time, and their words, I'm better. I'm completely cured. And it's not some chemical that we're pumping into our bodies every day. So,
I mean, it's a chemical we're pumping into our bodies, though.
Not every day. That's the thing. It's a chemical you pump in your body, and something in your mind is having a very, I don't know if it's a spiritual thing or if it's just a wires getting put in a different place. Some people go into it thinking it's just a wires put into place, and they come out thinking, well, maybe there is a God. So
there have been several studies that I've seen linking LSD to, in a single session, significantly reducing the effects of PTSD in vets. There have been a couple of studies, maybe just one, that looked at using LSD as a treatment for end of life, people who are in hospice, who they have a medical condition, we know they're going to die. Their ability to cope with that situation was made significantly better by psychedelics. I get a little bit nervous talking about them like they have no downside, as a lot of people, they see these positive reports. There's still, what did the psychology, I saw something that was talking about it and described it as the bad trip problem, in that a small number of people have the opposite effect. They have a bad trip and they can take years to get over it.
Yeah, there is definitely a dark side to, wait for it, literally everything. Yeah. All right. So we need to, I've said this before, is we need to treat guns the same way we need to treat drugs, the same way we treat soda. We need to understand it. We need to understand ourselves, and we need to understand how that thing can benefit us. And if it can't, then we act accordingly. The problem that we have is going back to the 60s and 70s in the US, we had some really messed up decisions that at the time seemed like it was a good thing. We put some mandates in place, maybe some laws that probably shouldn't have been put in place. We're just now starting to talk about these because I don't think we realized the damage. And oh boy, it's depressing. The more and more and more I look into it. And again, I don't want to come off like I'm that, like you mentioned, it's just perfect. Everyone just go do it.
Yeah.
That is not the message I'm trying to put, because as someone who has had a bad trip, and I don't even like to think of them as bad trips, because I learned a shitload through that bad trip. I think it was bad because I wasn't prepared for it. I didn't know what I was doing.
Yeah.
I didn't, I was rebelling the time that I had a very, very potent experience. And I can honestly say that that was the beginning of me changing into the person I am now, which I think I'm a better person. I've still got a lot of work to do, but I don't think we should be supporting mandates or censoring anything. I think we need to do the exact opposite.
Yeah, I am an advocate of the complete and total decriminalization of drugs for purely ethical and practical reasons. But one of those practical reasons is we don't know as much as we could know about psilocybin or LSD or any other psychedelic drug today because it's so hard to study them.
Mm-hmm.
Making it easier for researchers to have access to those and run ethical, studied, well-constructed studies could help us understand how these work and how they can help people. We could be decades ahead of where we are in psychopharmacology if we hadn't decided that we needed another weapon against the civil rights movement. And that's what the drug war was. It was a weapon against our own people, not as it was sold to the American people to protect the kids.
Well, I think it was a mix of all of it. I think there were people who really, and it comes down again to some people have these core beliefs that there's a man up there and he said bad, so we're not going to do it, no questions asked. And anyone who's had any experience with psychedelics, it doesn't really bode well with hierarchies. You know, you start to pull away the curtain on what the CIA and what the NSA are, and you're like, well, wait a second. What if we as Americans aren't justified in doing anything we want just because we're Americans, right? And we're like, maybe we shouldn't be over in this person's country telling them how to run their government. But if I say that, then I'm not patriotic, you know, and you become part of the enemy, and no one wants that, especially not during the McCarthy years.
Oh God, yeah.
Or heaven forbid the Salem years. But going back to the optimistic side, I think we're starting to have these open, candid conversations. I think there's more people that are willing to stand up and say, hey, I'm a good person and I like guns and I'm gay and I want to transition to be this and I do drugs and I'm still a father, I'm still a mother, I'm still a good citizen. And that's what it takes. It takes people standing up and saying, hey, right now I'm committing a felony and I don't care because that law is wrong. And going back to the censorship is the one I wanted to talk to you on. Do you think there is any room for censorship?
The only room I see for censorship is incitation to violence. If you are calling for a class of people to be harmed, that is where I see some leeway. But I am, in general, a crypto-anarchist. I think that as much as possible of the internet should be anonymous, free, and open communication. That communication is more valuable than the possible harm we can do with it.
The inciting to violence one is hard, though, because I think Martin Luther King was trying to incite violence. And so we're going to have to quiet him down, right?
Yeah. I'm not agreeing that Martin Luther King was trying to incite violence. I'm agreeing that trying to classify him as trying to incite violence is a way of taking control and quieting him down. Yeah, it's a danger with that approach.
It's incredibly dangerous. And so it's one of those things where it's like, well, when I get the power and I get to choose what's black and white, it's fine. But not him. No, 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 no. It's like all these executive orders that Biden's doing. If you're a liberal, you are having a fucking heyday with your smile on your face. Things are finally happening. All this change, we needed it. We needed it.
Really?
But when it's the other side, it's
I don't think I know any liberals who are happy right now.
Oh, really?
I guess I maybe haven't talked to too many of them yet, but
Do tell, because
they're happier than they were under Trump.
Most of my friends who aren't middle of the road like I am, they're more on the right side. I do have some friends who are incredibly liberal, but it always seems like Biden's great and Trump's bad. That's like the only narrative that I hear from either side. So
I hear
what's
that from
not
a couple of people, but I'm trying to remember some of the conversations I've had. I don't consider myself super liberal. I'm not super conservative. You could call me a centrist, but I sort of have ideas from both sides. And
hold up, you're a gay guy living in Seattle and you're not super liberal? No. That's like the biggest stereotype.
For a long time, I called myself a libertarian right up until I realized some of the nut jobs that call themselves libertarian.
Yeah, don't let nut jobs ruin a good thing, though.
Also, I drifted away from a lot of libertarian platforms on some ideas, but that's possibly too involved of a conversation.
That goes back to the whole static thing. The second you put a label on it, it takes this own life and it goes in a direction that whoever the most ambitious asshole that wants to take control of that group or that party or that tribe, whatever it is, they twist it into whatever they think it should be. I think that's where we are with, current political system period with the two parties is I don't think anyone 100% fully agrees with the platform on the right or the left. I think all of us have, I wish we had some a la carte system.
So I'm going to advocate very strongly for an a la carte system if you'll let me. Have you heard the term first past the post voting?
First past the post?
Yeah, that is the term for how most voting works in the United States. It's one person, one vote.
Okay.
Imagine, if you will, what would happen if instead of you having one vote for president, you could list every candidate you're willing to accept for president in the order you'd prefer them.
I've heard that idea, and I think it's a great idea I haven't put a ton of thought into it. Tell me a little bit more.
So right now in American politics, we have what's called the spoiler effect. If somebody runs who's very, very conservative, or, a hardcore libertarian or a hardcore fiscal conservative, they might take the people for whom those are the core issues and suck those votes away from whoever the Republican Party put up. And now, as a voter, if one of those people I wanted more, I'm afraid to vote for them because now the person I find acceptable but not optimal might lose because I've shifted my vote over to somebody else.
It's I voted for Joe Jorgensen, so I get yelled at because I'm letting the bad guy win.
Exactly. Now you have to worry about using your vote in opposition instead of as a positive mark of who you would support. So in the 2020 election, you weren't necessarily voting for Biden. You were voting against Trump or vice versa. With a ranked choice voting system, let's say that Ron Paul was your favorite. I honestly don't even know if Ron Paul actually ran in the last election, so hopefully this is a neutral enough statement.
We'll put Bob Dole in there as well, just to even it out.
Yes. Let's say that I liked Ron Paul, but if he loses, I'm okay with you picked Bob Dole. Let's go with Bob Dole.
Okay, Bob Dole. There we go.
But I don't want any of it. None of the other candidates would I support under any circumstances. I don't want them. So once these votes are tallied, nobody wins. Nobody gets above 50% of the vote. What you can do is take the candidates who got the fewest votes and remove them from the election and run the election again. And you can do this repeatedly, just knocking off the bottom one or two people until somebody wins that election. gets over 51% of the vote. And with this method, you can guarantee that whoever gets elected is supported by the majority of the people who voted. 51%.
So let's play the poke hole game. I think it's a fantastic idea. The issue is we have a one vote system, and the party that lost damn near succeeded in getting it pretty much thrown out. I mean, it was a lot of question thrown at these last election. And so what system could we use? Do we have a technology in place that we could actually have a trustworthy system that doesn't expose the voter? Because that's the thing with voting, right? You have the poll, or I mean the curtain there, so you can't have some guy sitting there with the billy club telling you who to vote for.
You can do this completely anonymously. You literally have a vote, and instead of filling in a circle, you're putting a number. This is my number 1 choice. This is my number 2 choice. This is my number 3 choice. This is my number 4 choice. And it can still be on a physical piece of paper like all votes should be. All electronic voting is a terrible idea, and this is a software engineer telling you about it. Don't do it.
So
have
don't
physical backups of all votes, period.
So the little screen that you touch with your knob, you're against?
They have voting machines out there that after you fill out the votes, after you click accept, it scrolls a physical piece of paper that it has filled in for you, and you say, yes, that was my vote. That's what you should
look
use.
at the... Oh, okay. So it's not that you're not using a screen, because that's very convenient.
Yeah, the screen fills it out. You still fill it out.
But it prints out a paper. You grab the paper, you verify it's right, and you hand it to someone?
You don't even grab it. It just scrolls past, and you say yes or no. So you're looking at the paper through a piece of glass. You can't modify it unless you click no, that is not accurate. Then it lets you go through the process again until you vote. These physical backups are very, very important because they cannot be modified in the way that data on a hard drive can be modified.
Okay. That's interesting. I think that's that would really stir things up, wouldn't it? How would that change debates? How would that change everything?
Oh, ranked choice voting?
Yeah.
The thing is that it, in my opinion, shatters the two-party system. Because I'm no longer voting against Donald Trump. I'm voting for the person I think is the best suited candidate for president of the United States. My vote becomes positive instead of negative.
Well, we still have the two-party system because you're going to have the primaries, and then like we saw with Hillary Clinton, that you're still going to have a group of people that say, hey, this person should win. If you're on our side, this is our choice, right?
But think about what the Democratic and Republican parties are. They're big tents. They are coalitions. On the Republican side, to name two groups, you have the social conservatives who believe in, for lack of a better term, enforcing religion through government. And you have the fiscal conservatives who believe that we should have a balanced budget and we should consider how we spend our government money. And you have, okay, let's name a third group. You have the social liberals is the only way I can think of to describe it. The classical liberals who say we need limited government. We need to keep people as free as possible. Right now, those three are in an unholy evil alliance. And namely, only one of those groups is the unholy evil in my mind. And on the other side, you have the Democrats who have communists, socialists. You have social democrats. The people who think that government should have a larger role and a more active role in shaping society. And if you have for ranked choice voting, let's just look at the communists. There are a lot of people I know who would vote communist if there was a communist party on the ticket that they didn't feel like they were wasting their vote. So they can now honestly vote for the communist without being afraid that some other candidate isn't going to lose. I think this erodes the two-party system to the point where I think the two primary parties would collapse, or at the very least dissolve down to much smaller versions of themselves within a couple of election cycles. Because you now have the Bible thumper, Rick Santorum. Let's pick Rick Santorum just so I can say Santorum some more. Are you familiar with the definition of Santorum? during I want to say it was the 2008 election, Rick Santorum said some pretty horrible things. So a author here in Seattle put up a poll of all of his users. What should we define Rick Santorum to mean now? The winning option, by the way, this is a gay author. The winning entry was the frothy mix of cum and fecal matter that is sometimes the result of anal sex.
Dear God.
That is how much Rick Santorum pissed off the gays. Anyway.
That's graphic.
Yeah, so now... Still appropriate for your podcast?
This is definitely not for kids. Definitely not for kids.
So...
I'll have a warning at the beginning. Warning may contain santorum.
So, me sitting here as my vote, I can vote for the candidates or the parties that really embody my ideals. And those groups wield power independently of the two-power system now. Because there's going to be some number of them that get elected to every level of government. Because we're no longer voting against the Republicans or against the Democrats. We're voting for what we believe. And I think that this will pull American politics way more towards the center. Because the people that maybe they're a little bit lower on our ranked choice list, but they're the more centrist candidates who really are talking about rational, reasonable solutions are going to get more votes that way. And this isn't a magic bullet. There's still all kinds of levels of government that would have to change in order to really kill the two-party system. But this helps erode it a lot, I think.
Well, you're definitely speaking my language. I've talked shit on the two-party system more than I am probably educated enough to talk about it. But that takes care of the ability to... Well, exactly what you said. Vote for more. I think that's an option, but you still have the two parties right now have a crap load of money and power right now, and so
and
if they allowed,
that's why they're so similar. If you look at their policies, they're interested in holding on to that power.
Yeah, it's it's the same beast. I'm the guy that when I get yelled at for quote unquote throwing my vote away, I yell back and say, "No, you are." And so I can go all day, and I understand the argument on both sides, but really the only way to change is for us to actually believe that we can. Isn't that funny? That's literally the only thing stopping us from having a third party win is we don't believe someone else is going to vote for it. Yeah. This last election was the perfect one too. And I was excited. I'm like, finally, we have two shitty candidates. We may have a chance. And not to talk shit on Jo Jorgensen. I really don't know anything about her. But, she just didn't really strike a chord with most people. But it could have been anyone. They still would have lost because I've had friends that voted Libertarian their whole entire adult life. This is the first time they voted Democrat because they hated Trump so much.
Yeah, because they were voting against a person, not for what they believed.
That's that's the exact reason. And he's like, no, man, this one's just, no, this is existentialism. This is like too big. I'm like... That is exactly what both sides want. That's what they do. They vilify the other side to the point where they're still going to be in power. I don't know. I'm an idiot though. So, but I think that's a great step. That's one that I'd heard before, but not in depth. The other one is party limits or term limits. Mm-hmm. There's, I don't know. I talked to a congressman, Rob Bishop. He was a congressman for about 18 years, and he seems to think like a 12-year term limit would work, but
2 terms as a senator. Yeah. So my concern with term limits is that that would make it easier for institutional knowledge to be lost. Like, yes, I would love it if we could limit the people in power from staying in power. But that would shift the power away from the Senate and House and into the bureaucracy that surrounds them that doesn't have a term limit. Because the people who know how the system works are the people who can work the system.
What Rob was saying was politicians don't really even do anything. They just sit there and it's the staff. the staff is what, I mean, we talked a little bit about the deep state. So like the organizations that are around that you get a job, you're not elected, and then you run pretty much willy-nilly, carte blanche, you can do anything you want because you're a CIA agent. Those are the people that are making a lot of the decisions. And then on the law side, the legislative side, it's the staffers. The staffers are the ones that know what's going on. And they're the same people, again, for 20, 30 years, right? Mm-hmm. So to me, I'm more interested in transparency. I'm more interested in getting someone up there that is willing to say, hey, this is what's going on behind the scenes, instead of someone who has some incentive to keep their mouth shut because they're either going to get ostracized from their group or they're going to miss out on a bunch of incentives. So I've been beating around the idea of, I'm not sure what I want to call it, like a dummy candidate. Pretty much we set it up to where you don't have to know squat to be our elected official. All you have to be willing to do is to expose your entire life. If you're going to be a servant of the people, you're going to be a servant of the people. We're going to know every single thing. Tax returns, you cannot have assets making money. You're going to get paid annually. You spend all that. You're not taking any bribes. You're not taking any gifts from anything, no trips. We're going to make you have a comfortable life. Call it $500,000 a year. I don't care. That's fine. We'll let you take 2 months vacation out of the year. Who cares? As long as we know that you're not getting paid under the table, you don't have anything else pushing for you.
I think one way to approach that is to make it a whole lot less expensive to get elected. The cost of a U.S. national campaign is absurd. And a politician has to go to great lengths to make sure that they can pay those ad bills on their next election cycle. So the motivation for corruption is huge there because it's so expensive to get elected.
It's because we're electing people. We're putting people on pedestals, and instead we should be electing ideas, electing what we want. So for example, we have this huge inefficiency going on right now in legislation. If we want to get a simple thing passed, it could take years, decades. So we were talking about psychedelics. I think this is a super low-hanging fruit. I think society is ready to realize, okay, even if I don't agree with using them, I agree we should study them. I think that we can all agree on. We should study them more. If we tried to go pass a law that's all it was just, hey, we're going to take psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, whatever we think, I would argue everything for studying purposes, 100% of all drugs, we're going to no longer schedule one that doesn't exist anymore. It means every substance, no matter what, is easily accessible if you're a researcher. That seems like a very simple thing that could take an hour to write up and do. It's literally that simple. The problem is we have a system right now to where the only way to get anything passed is you have to add on like 1,000 other things because that's just how the system is. Because we're voting for people and we're putting these people on platforms and they've made promises and you just don't know how the system works. It has to happen this way. You just don't understand. No, I don't understand. It doesn't need to happen.
But it's not difficult to see that it's corruption.
It's definitely corruption. And it's partly, to be nice. I've been in a position where as an employee, I thought my manager was an asshole. And then once I became the manager, I realized that I was the asshole as the employee, right? I think there is a part of that. And I think I talked about earlier about forgiving ourselves and forgiving each other for weird shit that may not be acceptable. We need to just get a stigma away. The only way we're getting past this is do the same thing for politicians. Even if you are a guy who dropped a bomb on another country and you don't agree with that, the only way that they're going to come out and be safe as a whistleblower is for us as a society to be like, okay, that was actually really shitty, but I trust that you can change, that's the hard part. But I really think that it's the putting a human on a pedestal that is perpetuating the system as much as anything else. I think term limits could potentially work, but like you said, it takes away some of the teeth. I think it's more of we need to get people in there that they're not really, I don't care if they even know what the law is, as long as they're being transparent about it. They're going to have staffers to help them write it, but I need someone who I can trust that's going to be like, okay, we're just going to vote on this one little item and then we'll be done with it and get this thing actually efficient. And I think technology is the answer. We're going to use technology in some way to where instead of voting for people, we're voting on ideas. And those ideas are passed through our representatives who their sole job is to be transparent and push the collective idea that we want.
So you want to hear one of my anti-liberal positions, or positions that might drive my liberal friends crazy?
Yeah, let's hear it.
I think absolute democracy is terrifying.
Why?
Imagine if we had taken a vote on normal election day on November 2001. One of the items on that list was human rights of Muslim Americans. How do you think America would have voted in 2001 about Muslim human rights?
Be more specific.
Anything. Let's say that there was a fast bill that was put up for public vote to allow the NSA and CIA complete jurisdiction to search all of the personal communications of every person who's stepped foot in a mosque in the United States in the last 10 years. How do you think that would have fared?
That's a good question.
It's not that extreme of a measure, yet it's a huge violation of the privacy and rights against unreasonable search and seizure for those people. Yet I'm willing to bet that in November 2001, the majority of Americans may well have supported it.
Do you think it happened anyways?
Of
whether
course
we
it did.
voted on it or not? So that's where I would argue that that's a good thing, because at least we know it's happening and we can learn from our mistake. The other option is what's actually happening, which is we have an organization that has this information. They're using it without our consent.
Yeah, and I agree that's a problem, but I don't think that handing that power to a populace whose passions can be swayed so easily is necessarily a good thing. I believe in many of the ideas of a republic, of an absolute law that you can't vote away, of absolute rights that no one can deprive you of unless you harm them first.
I think an absolute democracy could work given certain guidelines.
Yeah, within limitations, that it's not absolute, that you can't violate that core set of laws. I still think it'll have its problems because it will represent the prejudices of that population, but there's no real way to avoid that in almost any government system.
Well, how you need to do it is, like I was saying, start peeling off pieces of power from the top and bringing it back down to the roots. So let's say we had a vote on, let's use something that's very polarizing, let's use abortion, right? Mm-hmm. We have a vote on a national level, and hey, surprise, surprise, 100% of the people didn't agree on this. All right, this is no longer a federal or national thing. It comes down to the state. And then at the state level, you vote. All right, should we use tax dollars for abortions? Are we going to choose to put a portion of our taxes to assist with abortions? And then at each state level, oh, surprise, surprise, most of the states are still divided on it. Let's take it down to the community level. And if you want to live in a state where you think that tax dollars should go towards helping young women with abortions, or maybe it gets even more specific. Maybe it's in certain conditions, or maybe it's, and that's what I want. I want us to actually realize that what's already true, and that's that we do currently have the power to make these changes. We just don't realize it. And when we make it blatant like that, you're not just going to willy-nilly say, yeah, let's go seize all these Muslims' belongings, because all of a sudden you realize that you do have a strong responsibility because you have that power. And then what's going to happen is
I wish I had the faith to believe that people would treat their vote that seriously in that situation.
And if we're split on it, then nothing goes forward. But what it does, it's going to start a conversation. And then we're like, all right, at what point could we all agree on something? There's going to be low-hanging fruit. There's going to be things like human rights. having every human being actually equal in the United States. And we decide, all right, this is a right, it's inalienable, and we're actually going to mean that this time. And not just, white, bald guys with nice beards, everyone. And I think we're to the point where we're starting to realize that we can have discourse, we can have conversations, and the technology is the thing that's giving us the tool to actually be able to do it. And we're only going to be able to increase our ability to have conversations with nuance, to be able to say, okay, let's talk about gun laws. What are you willing to give up? Because any change that's made, it doesn't matter how you look at it, there is a group of people who are going to have to pay a cost and another one that's going to benefit. That's just reality, right? And it used to be white males had all the power, so why would they give it up? But we are in a place now where we're stripping those away to the point where humans actually are equal now. And so when we decide to make a change, let's talk about, all right, what's the cost? Who's going to pay it? Are they willing to pay it? And is that fair for everyone? Is that the best step forward? And we start talking about it instead of, your side's stupid, I can't believe you voted for him. We actually talk about issues instead of Trump is an asshole, because we all know he is. Biden is, I don't even know what it's, I'm sorry, but I'm going to piss off a lot of people.
Comes when you think about Biden, doesn't it?
Hey, I think that, and this is ageism at its worst, but I think at a certain age, you start having to retake your driver's license and you cannot run for office. I'm sorry. I just think that we've gone through that too many times. I mean, I'm sorry, but you get to a certain age, and even though you're wise as can be, if you can't remember where you put your keys, I don't want you being the most powerful person in the nation. I'm sorry. I really think we have, 35 years is the youngest you can be?
I think so, yeah.
I think a 30-year span's pretty good. I think 65, when you retire, you should retire. If we're giving people Social Security at 60, let's let these politicians retire, That's just, it's a nice thing. Let's look at it that way. We're letting them retire, and we will give them this nice golden parachute, but get the fuck out of the laws that are happening, because we're moving too fast. Societal norms are changing way too fast to have these old archaic ways. We're just not keeping up, and it's showing. I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe slowing down is the right thing to do. I don't know. I'm a moron.
I mean, I'm of two minds about that. Like, I think fundamental rights should be protected, and laws that abridge them or change them should be slow, because that should be something that has to be thought through. But on the other hand,
well, isn't that what the courts are, though? Isn't that what the judicial system's for? Are actual rights?
Yeah, after a fashion.
And that's a slow, that's one of the branches I actually think works for the most part.
I don't know. There have been a lot of shenanigans with the federal courts.
It's going in the right direction, though, right?
I think we're about to see a war of court manipulation, and it's already begun.
Really?
Yeah, with the federal court, with the bench. And I'm not talking at Supreme Court level. I'm talking about below, with justice appointments. I think that the two parties are manipulating each other really hard.
So,
and screwing with the court.
You're not talking about the Supreme Court. You're talking about
Yeah.
You are talking about the Supreme Court.
No, I'm talking about the federal bench.
Oh, okay.
Federal court system below the Supreme Court. I'm not as informed as I'd like to be about it. I haven't had time to do all of the reading, but from what I have been reading, it looks like there's already a lot of manipulations going on about timing of federal appointments and each side preventing the other from appointing enough judges just so that their side will have the chance to do it when they're in power. The same sort of thing they've been doing at the Supreme Court level, but it doesn't have the public's attention on it.
Well, I've been screaming for years, two-party system needs to go. I just don't see... Maybe you're right. Maybe if we did implement that, but the problem is, guess who's in power and gets to choose?
Exactly. There are so one of the biggest advantages of the U.S. Legal system when it comes to making a change like that is the federal courts, or rather the federal legislature, doesn't get to tell us how we run our elections. Our states get to tell us that. So there have already been ranked choice voting experiments run in several local areas in the United States, and I think it's gaining popularity. The other side of that is I think we need to both reform our voting system and reform election finance, because the money is manipulating the system to a much greater effect than any communication of ideas. It's throwing ads at each other, spamming TV space. I think the voting reform is more important, but both need to be done. But this is the constant problem of a government. Corruption always finds its way in, and we've got to clean it out every few years. It's our turn. Hopefully we'll do a decent job of it.
Oh boy. I'm going to stay an optimist, even though I don't see a way out. No, it comes every cycle I go in my brain where it goes 1,000 miles per minute. It always goes in this big old circle, and it always ends up back to the same thing. And it's just, we need to focus on the individual. I think we focus too much on the big bad guys that have the power, but those big bad guys are us, or they were at some point. So we need to, it sounds so stupid and simple when you say it. It sounds like I'm a big old hippie, but I guess my last name is Woodstock. But we really need to just focus on taking care of each other, left and right, trusting each other, giving each other reasons to trust us. And that starts with just taking away stigmas and actually talking about things for what they are. And what that means is you have to, the word's escaping me, but there's a buddy who was telling me about a book. Pretty much you have to expose yourself. You have to do the scary thing and say, hey, I don't care what this group says, I believe this. And that's hard because your job can be affected. Your freedom can be affected. When it comes to drugs, people could literally lose their kids, go to jail because they talk about something they strongly feel is good for society and they're not able to. So I
guess I don't know. If you aren't doing drugs and are just advocating for it, would you really lose your kids?
I think people need to step up and own the fact that we're all doing drugs.
Gotcha.
I mean, you can say all day that you support drugs, but I'm not. No, you're just perpetuating the stigma. So this guy named Carl Hart, he says, I don't respect people who don't openly talk about all the drugs they do. He very, very fascinating guy. He's at Columbia. He didn't do drugs until he was in his 30s. He was studying in a research setting, a clinical setting, drug use, and he realized that he was missing out on a lot of benefit. There's a lot of tools out there that he wasn't using, and so in his 30s he made the conscious decision with a lot of education to start using drugs. And this dude uses, like, let's just go to the extremes. I'm not talking about marijuana here. I'm talking about heroin and meth.
Ooh.
Like straight heroin. But when you say it in the light of he will only do it if he gets it directly from the source. He knows exactly what's in it. It's pure. And he's not lining it up, overdosing. He's taking enough for his body. And I'm like, I even hesitate talking about that because obviously people, I'm not telling you to go do heroin right now.
Please
good luck
don't.
finding good, clean heroin in the US because it's this terrible black market system.
And it is so addictive. So viciously addictive.
Yeah, but he argues that it's not any worse used correctly than half the stuff we think is fine. He thinks alcohol is way worse for you than heroin.
I think alcohol's atrocious.
So when you put it in that perspective, you're like, well, okay, yeah, I guess maybe I am vilifying something incorrectly. Heroin, though, is never, ever, ever get it and use it off the streets because there's other shit in it. Like I was talking to a doctor the other day, he's an anesthesiologist. He deals with fentanyl, and he was talking about the scale of it's like, what, 100,000 times more, not 100,000, but like 100. It's either 100 or 1,000 times more potent than morphine, which is what we give people to die. So kids, do not go out and do drugs.
And let me say in response to what you said a minute ago, I will be very open about what drugs I do, but not while I'm being recorded.
Yeah, and that
because it could affect my career.
Exactly. And I don't want to live in a place where it does, because I think there's a lot of harm by hiding it. I think there's a lot more harm in the boogeyman.
I agree.
Than all the other alternatives, as scary as they seem. All these terrible addicts that are shaken on the streets, that goes away when we treat it correctly.
When we take away the drug war and treat it as a medical problem, even if we don't legalize them, even if we just decriminalize them, our society gets better in a lot of ways.
Immediately.
Well,
there might be a little hiccup. But
there's going to be hiccups, but we have examples where this has happened. Portugal in the 90s. I haven't read about it recently, so I don't know what the most recent data is on Portugal, but they made the decision to decriminalize all substances.
I think they legalized, didn't they?
They didn't legalize everything. They made it essentially a medical problem. If you were caught possessing a drug, you were not criminally prosecuted. You were sent for rehabilitation or treatment.
In fact, they had centers that you could go test your drugs to make sure they're pure.
I didn't know that part.
Which I think is a very big part of it.
Right. But drug usage in Portugal went down. People were willing to go seek medical help when they were addicted, when they weren't willing to before because they could have been prosecuted. Shockingly, HIV infections went down.
Makes sense.
Because people weren't using a dirty needle to shoot up heroin anymore. And that's one of the biggest dirty needles is one of the biggest sources of blood-borne disease transmission, including HIV. I see the drug war as one of the biggest evils in the United States right now because we are asking our police forces to be at war with ourselves. We are making our society more dangerous under the guise of trying to make it safer. And in the end, you have a thriving black market with drugs being as cheap as you can imagine. You have the police throwing grenades into babies' cribs because they're beating down a door to search for drugs. You have innocent people dying when that's who that law is supposed to protect. It's absurd. And yet we've doubled down on it and keep making those laws stronger. And I think the decriminalization and legalization of pot over the last 10 years is a step in the right direction, but not nearly a big enough one.
Very disheartening conversation that I had with the congressman. I asked him, do they hear this in DC, and what's the conversation amongst your peers? And his response was, we don't ever talk about it. It's not even on their radar. Mm-hmm. And his words were, prohibition worked. People drank less alcohol.
That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah. And
this
he admitted, he did admit, to his credit, that's not his expertise, and he lived in the good old days. So
he may entirely be right by my knowledge, but I think that's missing the lesson from prohibition entirely.
Exactly. Obviously, less people drank alcohol, but at what cost?
We still have the criminal organizations that prohibition created.
Do we really? I thought those are all worked out.
Maybe they're not as strong as they used to be, but the mob
the
is
U.S.
still going.
government? Yeah, we still have that. Yep.
I guarantee you the mob is still going fine.
Well, my hope is that I don't know what, it's such an easy thing that could be very quick and simple. I would say write your congressman, but a congressman said no one actually listens to those letters. So I don't know
Doesn't
what the
surprise
answer
me at
is. I really don't. He claimed that he was like one of the only ones that ever did, that actually read them all and responded to them. I don't know how to verify that. Maybe everyone does, maybe no one does, but
I bet that every congressman claims to be one of the few. I don't know anything about the congressman you're talking about, so I don't want to malign his statement, but I don't trust politicians, and they'll say just about anything that can't be verified.
I really love the guy. He was actually my high school teacher. I really believe he means well. We didn't see eye to eye on a few things, but he still is, someone who does care and does what he thinks is correct. And that's, I've talked about, leaving the church a few times on the thing. And that's why I'm never going to vilify or talk bad about anyone who still believes in any religion, no matter how backwards it is. And if you have core beliefs and you act according to them in good faith, I'm not going to hold you against it. I can think you're wrong and I can think you're causing a lot of harm, but I'm not going to vilify you for it, or else I'm just the hypocrite at that point. But as long as we're talking about these things, it's eventually going to get better. I hope. I mean, I can't be too upset because it is really a great time to be alive. That's the best time to be alive on the face of the planet. I don't care who you are. I'll argue that to my death. Yes, there are bad times, and yes, we're yelling at each other through social media, but that's because we can. How amazing is that?
What a first world problem to have, screaming at each other through a computer screen from the comfort of our homes.
Every time I talk to someone that's from a different country, not like established Europeans, they'll claim that they like their country more, and good. I think everyone should think they have the best country. That's when we have a good world to live in, is when everyone thinks they're in the best country. But when I hear stories out of China where literally every single thing that they listen to is 100% the media, and even during the Olympics, like no Chinese people actually saw the opening ceremonies because they had anti-China protesters there, like pro-Taiwan. And so they just didn't let them watch it. I heard they put like a stand-up comedian, and that's what people watched. And there's the whole country. And that's a good country to live in compared to some. Then we'll start talking about Venezuela or North Korea.
Or North Korea, yeah.
And so, I mean, I feel stupid even complaining about this stuff, but I really do believe that the U.S. went off track mid-century, 1950s, 60s, 70s. There was a lot of stupid stuff that we did. But before that, we were the bastion of hope. We let democracy, we let freedom and free speech and everything grow us into an amazing country. We kind of got a little off track, but I think right now is the time that we're getting back on track. I'm choosing to believe that we're all going to take responsibility and start actually clicking on good. And we're going to actually vote for transparency at all costs. And even that means I expose myself a little bit. If that's the cost, I'm willing to pay that. And I hope other people are trusting enough of the societal norms shifting to where we can expose ourselves and not be afraid to say, I'm gay, or not be afraid to say, I want to transition to another gender. Be open and honest about it and trust that other people are going to listen. There's going to be assholes, and the trolls are the ones that are the loudest. But until we believe that the majority of people are going to at least maybe not agree, but at least try to understand, we're not going to be shifting as much, or at least as fast as I want it to. I want to live till I'm 80 and be healthy and happy, but I might not. I probably won't. I want to experience as much badass shit on this earth as I can. So let's just move it along. Okay. That's just try to trust each other more, be nice, and give each other reason to actually allow ourselves to open up and be more transparent.
So I want to respond to what you just said in two ways. First, yeah, I think that once we destigmatized, basically once we get a lot less puritanical and like admit that humans are humans and we do weird shit, we all do weird shit, and okay, things will get better that way. Things will get better once we're there, and once we say human beings are human. As long as you're not hurting anybody else, do what you're going to do.
But aren't we there? Like the grand majority of us, aren't we there?
I think a lot of us are that way, but our society doesn't act like it. We're that way in private, we're that way in person, we're that way in one-on-one, and then we pass trans bathroom laws. These two things are in opposition to one another. Then we have protesters screaming, God hates sinners at pride parades. We're not quite there yet.
Yeah, there's always going to be a fringe. There's always going to be crazies. There are always going to be people who literally just want to see the world burn. And there's always going to be people who are brainwashed into thinking that their way is right. But do you think that that's the majority of us still?
I used to not think so, but the last couple of years, the number of people who have voted for some really horrifying measures concerns me. And the fact that they keep getting proposed in legislatures and keep passing. So I think we're getting better. Again, I really do think we are. But before we get too far away from it, I wanted to respond to something else you said, that we started going the wrong direction in the mid-century. I agree with that in some ways, but I would say we were never on the right track. We just don't remember all the fucked up shit that the United States did in the 1800s as well as we remember what we as a culture did wrong. I'm sorry, not the government, but what we as a culture did in the 1800s. We just don't remember it as well as what we remember what's affecting us today. Because we did some pretty crazy stuff in the 1800s. Some pretty horrible stuff. But it doesn't have the impact today that it did then. So in 1900, you might have said that we started going wrong at the beginning of the Civil War. And meant it as equally strongly.
Let me clarify then. I am specifically talking about the government's overreach.
That has been a constant problem in the United States. What the Alien and Sedition Act... God, when was that passed? I don't remember dates. But it was a huge overreach by our own government to read people's letters, and it was not long after the forming of the nation. I'm going to look that up if you don't mind.
Yeah. Eventually I will get someone to be fact-checking. The fuckeries that I'm specifically talking about are, I'm really, really hurting my brain right now trying to remember this. Fiat currency, what was that, 71? That took us in a very terrible economic shift. And I don't know enough about it to give details, but I would urge anyone to look into what fiat currency is and why we're in a current situation that we are.
I don't think the gold standard would have continued to serve us as it had. Gold is a commodity, and tying our money to a single commodity could have ended just as badly. So,
I don't know, like I said, I don't know enough about it.
A pure fiat currency has its problems. So does the gold standard. But yeah, I get what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. The vilification of substances, throwing those on the Schedule 1, I think was a huge setback. And in the 50s, and I'll have to go back and listen to the one I did, he talked about a few different things that pretty much created what we now call the deep state, which is used a lot by conspiracy theorists, but is definitely not it's definitely there, and it's definitely done a lot of horrific things in the name of the U.S.
The weapons that we created to fight the Cold War are now what you're talking about, right?
Well, yeah, exactly. You know, we didn't learn from the Salem witch hunts, and we...
McCarthyism!
Yay! And then we created organizations that had unlimited power globally just due to our technological advances and wealth. The U.S. literally went and pissed in the world as if it was ours, and we messed up a lot of stuff in the name of good. And I think if we actually looked back and saw the stuff that we not allowed because most Americans didn't know it, it's just we had these people who got sick with power, just like you and I probably would, and in the name of what they thought was good, did some things that aren't irreparable, but we're still seeing the consequences of them. And it all comes back to, in my opinion, how power corrupts. The only way that we truly ever keep anything in life is by giving it away. But when you got that power, good luck giving it away. It takes a very strong man, very strong woman, very strong person to be able to get to that point and be like Washington, the father of our nation, saying, no, I'm not going to be king. It's very rare, but I think it's doable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm hoping that there's got to be there's going to be some catalyst. I like to think I hate even saying this because I started one, but I think podcasting is such a huge step in actually educating people enough to the point where we can actually believe it's going to happen. Because that's when you start realizing that you're not the only one that has very similar feelings. And regular media and social media definitely has not been doing that. But it's finally a format to where it allows certain people to actually speak freely. And even though a guest might not feel comfortable, it at least gives a ground for people to actually be authentic and open and say, hey, this is what I want. It gives a voice to a person that's not a little tweet or a meme.
I do like that podcasting gives that the capability of a conversation in a way that most other forms of media haven't been used for. The back and forth, the exchange of ideas between two people is one of my favorite things to do and listen to. And podcasting makes that much more available than even YouTube did. Like, I don't see all of that, all that much of that kind of idea in the YouTube or other video type of formats.
We like shiny things. It goes back to don't click on the shit that. But in YouTube, the reason I think it goes wrong is because we're bored by just sitting there and staring at it. I can't watch a 2-hour conversation. I just can't. I'm going to do something else.
I have on YouTube watched a 2-hour debate, and it would be a little bit too strong of a statement to say it changed my life, but it sticks with me to this day as something that had an effect on me.
I can only listen to podcasts while I'm driving or doing some sort of like lawn maintenance or something. I'm washing the dishes or that's why most podcasting was directed towards housewives for years and years and years, because those are the ones that listen to audiobooks and podcasts. They would clean the house and listen to stuff. My mom used to do it with audiobooks back in the day. But now there's this huge surge of people who are driving in their trucks, truck drivers or people delivery services or Ubers, and they're sitting in their car and they're doing something and they don't want to just listen to music. They want to actually learn, but they're sick and tired of people saying, hey, I've got it all figured out. If you buy my book, I'm going to make you rich. And it's like, no, you're just another dude that's trying to figure this out and you're better at faking it. So with the podcast setup, and more specifically, I guess, let me be specific, long form conversations, podcasts of just, some are just fun, theatrical events. That's great. Entertainment is awesome. I love it. But if we're going to actually talk about real things that could potentially educate us or enlighten us or open our minds, make us better people, and I think everyone wants to be a better person. Most people do. I just think it's the best vehicle that we have right now until Elon Musk figures out Neuralink and we can read each other's minds. But that's my plug. It seems disingenuous because I started a podcast, but I started a podcast because I believe that, not because the other way around, right? So probably shouting into the void, but I'm really appreciate you shouting with me, man. It was a good time. Fun. Can you believe it's been over 2 hours?
I can't. But I do want to say, if you do want to learn coding, go look at free online code camp or Khan Academy.
Well, I feel like I'm an old dog. I think I'm past the point to where actually learning coding would be beneficial to me. Do you think I'm wrong?
I am so in the world of coding and software that I can't actually really understand what it's like to use technology without understanding basic code. But on the other hand, I want to say that I think that people who use technology every day understand coding better than they think they do. Do you use spreadsheets?
Mm-hmm.
Do you use formulas in spreadsheets?
A little bit, yeah. I've
That's
done
basic.
a few
That's code.
macros here and there, but like I had to follow along a little YouTube video or something.
That's code. The macros are running through an interpreter and being executed as code. That's what's happening. You've written code. Don't you feel better now?
Ladies and gentlemen, I am a professional computer programmer. I want to get my daughter into coding. She's 7 years old, and I think that's
awesome.
Is that the right age?
I honestly don't know when the right age to start is. I can't answer that. What I can tell you is that there are programming languages and programs and educational approaches that are specifically designed for children. There are graphical programming languages that are like your program execution pointer is a turtle. It looks like a game, but it's meant to help introduce a child to the concepts of manipulating a program. Have you ever heard of Lego robotics? I can't remember what it's called. Lego Mastermind, Lego something or other.
Mm-mm.
So there are full-on robotics competitions, and most of the competitors are teenagers or preteens, and they are programming robots to complete tasks. They're writing programs just to make the robot move around. I would have loved that when I was 15. Being able to program a robot, couldn't imagine anything better. So there are approaches to getting young kids up into teenage years through those sort of technical competency concepts.
Do you know what we didn't touch on?
What's that?
Tesla's new robot. Did you see that?
You're the second person to mention this to me today, and I have not.
I watched all of Battery Day, and it was just this slog fest of boredom, minus a few moments that I thought were very fascinating. But apparently I missed out on AI Day for Tesla. They talked about all like there's pictures of the like 125-pound robot that can pick up 85 pounds and walk with it, or 45 pounds. I don't know the specifics, but yeah, Tesla now is a humanoid robot company.
Interesting.
Like straight out of iRobot. It's actually foreboding a little bit. Let's do this right, humans. Come on. Let's figure this out.
Okay, you say that, but we have robots autonomously killing humans right now. You know that, right?
Not autonomously. People actually are driving them, I thought.
No. There are robots out there that have been programmed with a set of parameters and are going out and killing people. This is happening today.
Wait, give me specifics. Like, what do you...
Okay, you're going to want specifics, but I can't actually give you some because I don't remember them clearly.
We're talking about like Boston Dynamics robots rolling around killing people?
We're talking about little flying drones with tiny little rockets on them, basically.
Yeah, but those are always driven by a human.
Nope.
Or
sorry,
their coordinates are put in and say, hey, click this. What do you mean?
There was actually a news article, I think it was last month, that the first documented case, this has been going on for a while, but the first documented case of a robotic aircraft, and this was a little drone, I think it was a quadcopter or something along those lines, was given a set of target parameters. It identified and killed a target without human intervention.
Do you know what the target was?
It was... It's a civil war that's going on somewhere in the Middle East. I think it was Syria, perhaps. I can give you the specifics after we're done.
Wow. So it wasn't a specific GPS coordinate. It was, hey, go up in the sky, use a camera to identify something, and then if you see this thing, get it?
Yeah.
Ooh.
These weapons have apparently been out there for a while, but this is the first provable documented case according to, I believe, the UN. The UN put out this report.
What government takes responsibility for it?
Again, I don't remember enough details about this situation without looking it up to tell you.
Wow. Well, we're here, boys. Skynet, it's arrived.
Yeah, the robots are here. The robots are everywhere, and most of them are just deciding what YouTube videos you get to watch or you get presented with. But we have self-driving cars. We have autonomous self-driving vehicles today. We have robot war machines today. It's not coming, it's here.
I like to bat around different ideas, and the one that I really enjoy talking about is the idea that singularity happened already and it's come and gone, and it just came to the conclusion that if it fought humans, we'd eventually nuke ourselves and or just throw an EMP. And so it's like just kindly leading us in the direction it wants.
So you're talking about singularity like it's self-aware AI rather than just a computational landmark?
So I understand that's not what, because that's exactly what I think singularity is. It's the point where AI is self-aware and it's taking over. So maybe I have the term wrong.
That's not my understanding of the term. My understanding of the term is more of a computational landmark of how powerful the computer is, not necessarily what it's doing.
Oh, just capabilities, not anything where it has consciousness.
That is one of the definitions I've heard, yes. So It may have consciousness, but that doesn't mean it's taking over our military. The first AI that has what we would call consciousness will be created in a lab somewhere.
Or has been, more likely.
It could be. I don't know if we're that advanced yet.
I don't know, man. You've seen the video footage of those weird ships that, as the Pentagon puts it, are not of earthly origins, or I can't remember the exact terms, but they have stuff that goes from like 60,000 or 30,000 feet down to zero elevation in a split second. We got it on visuals. We got it on radar. Like, either we're in the Matrix or we have technology that is way more than we understand right now. It's one of the two.
Possibly.
Or maybe there's a multi-dimensional thing where I think that's fairly likely. Yeah. I think the infinite is something that our little monkey pea brains can't really fathom, but we try.
We're really bad at thinking about very small things and equally bad at thinking about very large things.
Well, the fact that there's always a beginning and there's always an end, and the fact that when you really think about it, there isn't, that's when my brain just shuts down. So I like thinking about it, though, normally when I'm smoking weed.
So you tried to end the conversation a few minutes ago. I think I'll let you go.
Oh, man, I could keep talking forever, but I think we've been doing this close to 3 hours now, so we should probably wrap it up, and we'll just chalk it off as next time we'll get into all the real conversation. But dude, thank you so much. It's been a real blast. Coming up to just down the road from Chaz, which I kind of want to drive by, even though it's all gone now, right?
I imagine. I haven't actually been up to that park recently. So what you were talking about was mostly like the camp, but what I was talking about was the little area right next to the camp where there was just a line of people. But as I understand it, most of that closed up when we had some big forest fires that just choked everybody out. Everybody had to get indoors.
I gotcha. Yeah, we've been dealing with smoke from Midwest all the way over here. It's Glacier is a beautiful place, even with a bunch of smoke in it. But Thanks again for your time, man. And thanks, everybody. Talk soon.
Enjoy.
Hey, everybody. The conversation is getting bigger and bigger, and I want to invite all of you to join in. There's a few ways to do it. You can go to iamwoodstock.com. That's iamwoodstock.com. There you'll find a contact form where you can input your email and contact me directly. You can also go to the I Am Woodstock Facebook page to leave comments and start a conversation with the entire iaW community. If you're a fan of pictures, check out the I Am Woodstock Instagram, where my wife is sharing some of the family adventures. If you're enjoying the show and want it to grow even more, go to the Good Stuff page on my website. There you'll find links to all of my sponsors, as well as a link directly to the I Am Woodstock Patreon, where you can become an official patron and allow me to be picky about the sponsors I choose. Thank you all for the support, and don't forget, this is all about starting real conversations. If you're driving in your car, call up a friend who you haven't seen in a while and discuss some of the topics you've come across on the show. Trust me, you will not regret it. See you next time.
I am Woodstock.